Three Duels, 1 hour, the birth of a legend. The Three Musketeers, Audiobook, Chapters 3-5. Welcome back to the Emotive Archive. We left our young hero, D'Artagnan, standing in the bustling antechamber of Monsieur de Tréville, awestruck by the legendary musketeers he so admired. Now, the moment has come for his audience with the formidable captain. But Paris in the 17th century is a city of quick tempers and drawn swords. In the next hour, through a combination of youthful pride and sheer bad luck, D'Artagnan will manage to insult not one, not two, but all three of the most famous musketeers in the regiment, scheduling himself for 3 consecutive duels that seem certain to end his life before his adventure has truly begun.
Chapter 3 of the D'Artagnan Romances, Volume 1, The Three Musketeers, by Alexandre Dumas, translated by William Robson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Audience. Monsieur de Tréville was at the moment in rather ill humor. Nevertheless, he saluted the young man politely, who bowed to the very ground, and he smiled on receiving D'Artagnan's response, the Béarnese accent of which recalled to him at the same time his youth and his country, a double remembrance which makes a man smile at all ages. But stepping toward the antechamber and making a sign to D'Artagnan with his hand, as if to ask his permission to finish with others before he began with him, he called 3 times, with a louder voice at each time, so that he ran through the intervening tones between the imperative accent and the angry accent. "Athos! Porthos! Aramis!" The 2 musketeers with whom we have already made acquaintance, and who answered to the last of these 3 names, immediately quitted the group of which they had formed a part, and advanced toward the cabinet, the door of which closed after them as soon as they had entered. Their appearance, although it was not quite at ease, excited by its carelessness, at once full of dignity and submission, the admiration of D'Artagnan, who beheld in these 2 men demigods, and their leader an Olympian Jupiter, armed with all his thunders. When the 2 musketeers had entered, when the door was closed behind them, when the buzzing murmur of the antechamber, to which the summons which had been made had doubtless furnished fresh food, had recommenced, when Monsieur de Tréville had 3 or 4 times paced in silence, and with a frowning brow, the whole length of his cabinet, passing each time before Porthos and Aramis, who were as upright and silent as if on parade, he stopped all at once full in front of them, and covering them from head to foot with an angry look. "Do you know what the king said to me?" cried he, "and that no longer ago than yesterday evening? Do you know, gentlemen?" "No," replied the 2 musketeers after a moment's silence. "No, sir, we do not." "But I hope that you will do us the honor to tell us," added Aramis in his politest tone and with his most graceful bow. "He told me that he should henceforth recruit his musketeers from among the guards of Monsieur the Cardinal." "The guards of the Cardinal? And why so?" asked Porthos warmly. "Because he plainly perceives that his piquette stands in need of being enlivened by a mixture of good wine." Piquette is a watered liquor made from the second pressing of the grape. The 2 musketeers reddened to the whites of their eyes. D'Artagnan did not know where he was, and wished himself 100 feet underground. "Yes, yes," continued Monsieur de Tréville, growing warmer as he spoke, "and his Majesty was right, for upon my honor, it is true that the musketeers make but a miserable figure at court.
The cardinal related yesterday, while playing with the king with an air of condolence very displeasing to me, that the day before yesterday those damned musketeers, those daredevils, he dwelt upon these words with an ironical tone still more displeasing to me. Those braggarts, added he, glancing at me with his tiger cat's eye, had made a riot in the Rue Ferou in a cabaret, and that a party of his guards, I thought he was going to laugh in my face, had been forced to arrest the rioters. Morbleu, you must know something about it. Arrest musketeers. You were among them. You were. Don't deny it. You were recognized and the cardinal named you. But it's all my fault. Yes, it's all my fault. Because it is myself who selects my men. You, Aramis, why the devil did you ask me for a uniform when you would have been so much better in a cassock? And you, Porthos, do you only wear such a fine golden baldric to suspend a sword of straw from it? And Athos, I don't see Athos. Where is he? Ill. Very ill, say you? And of what malady? It is feared that it may be the smallpox, sir, replied Porthos, desirous of taking his turn in the conversation. And what is serious is that it will certainly spoil his face. The smallpox? That's a great story to tell me, Porthos. Sick of the smallpox at his age? No, but wounded without doubt. Killed, perhaps? If I knew. S'blood, Messieurs Musketeers, I will not have this haunting of bad places, this quarreling in the streets, this swordplay at the crossways, and above all, I will not have occasion given for the cardinal's guards, who are brave, quiet, skillful men, who never put themselves in a position to be arrested, and who, besides, never allow themselves to be arrested, to laugh at you. I am sure of it. They would prefer dying on the spot to being arrested or taking back a step. To save yourselves, to scamper away, to flee. That is good for the king's musketeers. Porthos and Aramis trembled with rage. They could willingly have strangled Monsieur de Tréville if, at the bottom of all this, they had not felt it was the great love he bore them which made him speak thus. They stamped upon the carpet with their feet. They bit their lips till the blood came, and grasped the hilts of their swords with all their might. All without had heard, as we have said, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis called, and had guessed, from Monsieur de Tréville's tone of voice, that he was very angry about something. 10 curious heads were glued to the tapestry and became pale with fury, for their ears, closely applied to the door, did not lose a syllable of what he said, while their mouths repeated as he went on the insulting expressions of the captain to all the people in the antechamber. In an instant, from the door of the cabinet to the street gate, the whole hotel was boiling. Ah! The king's musketeers are arrested by the guards of the cardinal, are they? Continued Monsieur de Tréville, as furious at heart as his soldiers, but emphasizing his words and plunging them one by one, so to say, like so many blows of a stiletto into the bosoms of his auditors. What? 6 of his Eminence's guards arrest 6 of his Majesty's musketeers? Morbleu! My part is taken. I will go straight to the Louvre. I will give in my resignation as captain of the king's musketeers to take a lieutenancy in the cardinal's guards. And if he refuses me, morbleu, I will turn abbé. At these words, the murmur without became an explosion. Nothing was to be heard but oaths and blasphemies. The morbleus, the sanctus, the mortu le diable crossed one another in the air. D'Artagnan looked for some tapestry behind which he might hide himself, and felt an immense inclination to crawl under the table. "Well, my captain," said Porthos, quite beside himself, "the truth is that we were 6 against 6, but we were not captured by fair means, and before we had time to draw our swords, 2 of our party were dead, and Athos, grievously wounded, was very little better. for you know Athos. Well, Captain, he endeavored twice to get up and fell again twice. And we did not surrender. No, they dragged us away by force. On the way we escaped. As for Athos, they believed him to be dead and left him very quiet on the field of battle, not thinking it worth the trouble to carry him away. That's the whole story. What the devil, Captain? One cannot win all one's battles. The great Pompey lost that of Pharsalia. The Francis I, who was, as I have heard say, as good as other folks, nevertheless lost the battle of Pavia. And I have the honor of assuring you that I killed one of them with his own sword, said Aramis. For mine was broken at the first parry. Killed him, or poniarded him, sir, as is most agreeable to you. I did not know that, replied Monsieur de Tréville in a somewhat softened tone. The Cardinal exaggerated, as I perceive. But pray, sir, continued Aramis, who, seeing his captain become appeased, ventured to risk a prayer, do not say that Athos is wounded. He would be in despair if that should come to the ears of the king. And as the wound is very serious, seeing that after crossing the shoulder it penetrates into the chest, it is to be feared. At this instant the tapestry was raised, and a noble and handsome head, but frightfully pale, appeared under the fringe. Athos! cried the two Musketeers. Athos! repeated Monsieur de Tréville himself. You have sent for me, sir, said Athos to Monsieur de Tréville in a feeble yet perfectly calm voice. You have sent for me, as my comrades inform me, and I have hastened to receive your orders. I am here. What do you want with me? And at these words, the Musketeer, in irreproachable costume, belted as usual with a tolerably firm step, entered the cabinet. Monsieur de Tréville, moved to the bottom of his heart by this proof of courage, sprang toward him. I was about to say to these gentlemen, added he, that I forbid my Musketeers to expose their lives needlessly, for brave men are very dear to the king, and the king knows that his Musketeers are the bravest on the earth. Your hand, Athos. And without waiting for the answer of the newcomer to this proof of affection, Monsieur de Tréville seized his right hand and pressed it with all his might, without perceiving that Athos, whatever might be his self-command, allowed a slight murmur of pain to escape him, and if possible, grew paler than he was before. The door had remained open, so strong was the excitement produced by the arrival of Athos, whose wound, though kept as a secret, was known to all. A burst of satisfaction hailed the last words of the captain, and two or three heads, carried away by the enthusiasm of the moment, appeared through the openings of the tapestry. Monsieur de Tréville was about to reprehend this breach of the rules of etiquette, when he felt the hand of Athos, who had rallied all his energies to contend against pain, at length overcome by it, fell upon the floor as if he were dead. "A surgeon!" cried Monsieur de Tréville. "Mine, the king's, the best! A surgeon! Or, s'blood, my brave Athos will die!" At the cries of Monsieur de Tréville, the whole assemblage rushed into the cabinet, he not thinking to shut the door against anyone, and all crowded round the wounded man. But all this eager attention might have been useless if the doctor so loudly called for had not chanced to be in the hotel. He pushed through the crowd, approached Athos, still insensible, and as all this noise and commotion inconvenienced him greatly, he required as the first and most urgent thing that the Musketeer should be carried into an adjoining chamber. Immediately, Monsieur de Tréville opened and pointed the way to Porthos and Aramis, who bore their comrade in their arms. Behind this group walked the surgeon, and behind the surgeon the door closed. The cabinet of Monsieur de Tréville, generally held so sacred, became in an instant the annex of the antechamber. Everyone spoke, harangued, and vociferated, swearing, cursing, and consigning the cardinal and his guards to all the devils. An instant after, Porthos and Aramis re-entered, the surgeon and Monsieur de Tréville alone remaining with the wounded.
At length, M. de Tréville himself returned. The injured man had recovered his senses. The surgeon declared that the situation of the Musketeer had nothing in it to render his friends uneasy, his weakness having been purely and simply caused by loss of blood. Then M. de Tréville made a sign with his hand, and all retired except D'Artagnan, who did not forget that he had an audience, and with the tenacity of a Gascon remained in his place. When all had gone out and the door was closed, M. de Tréville, on turning round, found himself alone with the young man. The event which had occurred had in some degree broken the thread of his ideas. He inquired what was the will of his persevering visitor. D'Artagnan then repeated his name, and in an instant recovering all his remembrances of the present and the past, M. de Tréville grasped the situation.
"Pardon me," said he, smiling. "Pardon me, my dear compatriot, but I had wholly forgotten you. But what help is there for it? A captain is nothing but a father of a family, charged with an even greater responsibility than the father of an ordinary family. Soldiers are big children. But as I maintain that the orders of the king, and more particularly the orders of the cardinal, should be executed—"
D'Artagnan could not restrain a smile. By this smile, M. de Tréville judged that he had not to deal with a fool, and changing the conversation, came straight to the point.
"I respected your father very much," said he. "What can I do for the son? Tell me quickly. My time is not my own."
"Monsieur," said D'Artagnan, "on quitting Tarbes and coming hither, it was my intention to request of you, in remembrance of the friendship which you have not forgotten, the uniform of a Musketeer. But after all that I have seen during the last 2 hours, I comprehend that such a favor is enormous, and tremble lest I should not merit it."
"It is indeed a favor, young man," replied M. de Tréville, "but it may not be so far beyond your hopes as you believe, or rather as you appear to believe. But His Majesty's decision is always necessary, and I inform you with regret that no one becomes a Musketeer without the preliminary ordeal of several campaigns, certain brilliant actions, or a service of 2 years in some other regiment less favored than ours."
D'Artagnan bowed without replying, feeling his desire to don the Musketeer's uniform vastly increased by the great difficulties which preceded the attainment of it.
"But,"
continued M. de Tréville, fixing upon his compatriot a look so piercing that it might be said he wished to read the thoughts of his heart, "on account of my old companion, your father, as I have said, I will do something for you, young man. Our recruits from Béarn are not generally very rich, and I have no reason to think matters have changed much in this respect since I left the province. I dare say you have not brought too large a stock of money with you." D'Artagnan drew himself up with a proud air, which plainly said, "I ask alms of no man."
"Oh, that's very well, young man," continued M. de Tréville. "That's all very well. I know these airs. I myself came to Paris with 4 crowns in my purse, and would have fought with anyone who dared to tell me I was not in a condition to purchase the Louvre."
D'Artagnan's bearing became still more imposing. Thanks to the sale of his horse, he commenced his career with 4 more crowns than M. de Tréville possessed at the commencement of his.
"You ought, I say, then, to husband the means you have, however large the sum may be, but you ought also to endeavor to perfect yourself in the exercises becoming a gentleman. I will write a letter today to the director of the Royal Academy, and tomorrow he will admit you without any expense to yourself. Do not refuse this little service. Our best-born and richest gentlemen sometimes solicit it without being able to obtain it. You will learn horsemanship, swordsmanship in all its branches, and dancing. You will make some desirable acquaintances, and from time to time you can call upon me, just to tell me how you are getting on, and to say whether I can be of further service to you."
D'Artagnan, stranger as he was to all the manners of a court, could not but perceive a little coldness in this reception. "Alas, sir," said he, I cannot but perceive how sadly I missed the letter of introduction which my father gave me to present to you."
"I certainly am surprised," replied Monsieur de Tréville, "that you should undertake so long a journey without that necessary passport, the sole resource of us poor Béarnese."
"I had one, sir, and thank God, such as I could wish," cried D'Artagnan, "but it was perfidiously stolen from me." He then related the adventure of Meung, described the unknown gentleman with the greatest minuteness, and all with a warmth and truthfulness that delighted Monsieur de Tréville.
"This is all very strange," said Monsieur de Tréville, after meditating a minute. "You mentioned my name, then aloud?"
"Yes, sir, I certainly committed that imprudence, but why should I have done otherwise? A name like yours must be as a buckler to me on my way. Judge if I should not put myself under his protection." Flattery was at that period very current, and Monsieur de Tréville loved incense as well as a king, or even a cardinal. He could not refrain from a smile of visible satisfaction, but this smile soon disappeared, and returning to the adventure of Meung,
"Tell me," continued he, "had not this gentleman a slight scar on his cheek?"
"Yes, such a one as would be made by the grazing of a ball."
"Was he not a fine-looking man?"
"Yes."
"Of lofty stature?"
"Yes."
"Of pale complexion and brown hair?"
"Yes, yes, that is he. How is it, sir, that you are acquainted with this man? If I ever find him again, and I will find him, I swear, were it in hell."
"He was waiting for a woman?"
continued Tréville. He departed immediately after having conversed for a minute with her whom he awaited."
"You know not the subject of their conversation?"
"He gave her a box, told her not to open it except in London."
"Was this woman English?"
"He called her Milady."
"It is he. It must be he,"
murmured Tréville.
"I believed him still at Brussels."
"Oh, sir, if you know who this man is," cried D'Artagnan, "tell me who he is, and whence he is. I will then release you from all your promises, even that of procuring my admission into the Musketeers, for before everything, I wish to avenge myself."
"Beware, young man,"
cried Tréville.
"If you see him coming on one side of the street, pass by the other. Do not cast yourself against such a rock. He would break you like glass."
"That will not prevent me," replied D'Artagnan. "If I ever find him—"
"In the meantime," said Tréville, "seek him not, if I have a right to advise you."
All at once the captain stopped, as if struck by a sudden suspicion. This great hatred which the young traveler manifested so loudly for this man, who, a rather improbable thing, had stolen his father's letter from him, was there not some perfidy concealed under this hatred? Might not this young man be sent by his Eminence? Might he not have come for the purpose of laying a snare for him? This pretended D'Artagnan, was he not an emissary of the Cardinal, whom the Cardinal sought to introduce into Tréville's house, to place near him, to win his confidence, and afterward to ruin him, as had been done in 1,000 other instances? He fixed his eyes upon D'Artagnan even more earnestly than before. He was moderately reassured, however, by the aspect of that countenance, full of astute intelligence and affected humility.
"I know he is a Gascon," reflected he, "but he may be one for the cardinal as well as for me. Let us try him. My friend," said he slowly, "I wish, as the son of an ancient friend, for I consider the story of the lost letter perfectly true, I wish, I say, in order to repair the coldness you may have remarked in my reception of you, to discover to you the secrets of our policy. The king and the cardinal are the best of friends. Their apparent bickerings are only feints to deceive fools. I am not willing that a compatriot, a handsome cavalier, a brave youth, quite fit to make his way, should become the dupe of all these artifices and fall into the snare after the example of so many others who have been ruined by it. Be assured that I am devoted to both of these all-powerful masters, and that my earnest endeavors have no other aim than the service of the king and also the cardinal, one of the most illustrious geniuses that France has ever produced. Now, young man, regulate your conduct accordingly, and if you entertain, whether from your family, your relations, or even from your instincts, any of these enmities which we see constantly breaking out against the cardinal, bid me adieu and let us separate. I will aid you in many ways, but without attaching you to my person. I hope that my frankness, at least, will make you a friend, for you are the only young man to whom I have hitherto spoken as I have done to you."
Tréville said to himself,
"If the cardinal has set this young fox upon me, he will certainly not have failed. He who knows how bitterly I execrate him, to tell his spy that the best means of making his court to me is to rail at him. Therefore, in spite of all my protestations, if it be as I suspect, my cunning gossip will assure me that he holds his eminence in horror."
It, however, proved otherwise. D'Artagnan answered with the greatest simplicity, "I came to Paris with exactly such intentions. My father advised me to stoop to nobody but the king, the cardinal, and yourself, whom he considered the first three personages in France." D'Artagnan added M. de Tréville to the others, as may be perceived, but he thought this addition would do no harm. "I have the greatest veneration for the cardinal," continued he, "and the most profound respect for his actions. So much the better for me, sir, if you speak to me as you say with frankness, for then you will do me the honor to esteem the resemblance of our opinions. But if you have entertained any doubt, as naturally you may, I feel that I am ruining myself by speaking the truth. But I still trust you will not esteem me for the less for it, and that is my object beyond all others." M. de Tréville was surprised to the greatest degree. So much penetration, so much frankness created admiration, but did not entirely remove his suspicions. The more this young man was superior to others, the more he was to be dreaded if he meant to deceive him. Nevertheless, he pressed D'Artagnan's hand and said to him, "You are an honest youth, but at the present moment I can only do for you that which I just now offered. My hotel will be always open to you. Hereafter, being able to ask for me at all hours and consequently to take advantage of all opportunities, you will probably obtain that which you desire." "That is to say," replied D'Artagnan, "that you will wait until I have proved myself worthy of it? Well, be assured," added he with the familiarity of a Gascon, "you shall not wait long." And he bowed in order to retire, and as if he considered the future in his own hands.
"But wait a minute," said M. de Tréville, stopping him. "As I promised you a letter for the director of the Academy, are you too proud to accept it, young gentleman?"
"No, sir," said D'Artagnan, "and I will guard it so carefully that I will be sworn it shall arrive at its address, and woe be to him who shall attempt to take it from me." M. de Tréville smiled at this flourish, and leaving this young man compatriot in the embrasure of the window, where they had talked together, he seated himself at a table in order to write the promised letter of recommendation. While he was doing this, D'Artagnan, having no better employment, amused himself with beating a march upon the window and with looking at the Musketeers, who went away one after another, following them with his eyes until they disappeared. M. de Tréville, after having written the letter, sealed it, and rising, approached the young man in order to give it to him. But at the very moment when D'Artagnan stretched out his hand to receive it, M. de Tréville was highly astonished to see his protégé make a sudden spring, become crimson with passion, and rush from the cabinet, crying, "S'blood! He shall not escape me this time!"
"And who?"
asked M. de Tréville.
"He, my thief!"
replied D'Artagnan.
"Ha! The traitor!"
And he disappeared.
"The devil take the madman," murmured Monsieur de Tréville. "Unless," added he, "this is a cunning mode of escaping, seeing that he had failed in his purpose."
End of Chapter 3. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 4 of the D'Artagnan Romances, Volume 1, The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas, translated by William Robson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The shoulder of Athos, the baldric of Porthos, and the handkerchief of Aramis. D'Artagnan, in a state of fury, crossed the antechamber at 3 bounds, and was darting down the stairs, while he reckoned upon descending 4 at a time, when, in his heedless course, he ran head foremost against a Musketeer who was coming out of one of Monsieur de Tréville's private rooms, and striking his shoulder violently, made him utter a cry, or rather a howl. "Excuse me," said D'Artagnan, endeavoring to resume his course. "Excuse me, but I am in a hurry." Scarcely had he descended the first stair when a hand of iron seized him by the belt and stopped him.
"You are in a hurry?" said the Musketeer, as pale as a sheet. "Under that pretense you run against me? You say, 'Excuse me,' and you believe that is sufficient? Not at all, my young man. Do you fancy because you have heard Monsieur de Tréville speak to us a little cavalierly today, that other people are to treat us as he speaks to us? Undeceive yourself, comrade. You are not Monsieur de Tréville."
"My faith," replied D'Artagnan, recognizing Athos, who, after the dressing performed by the doctor, was returning to his old apartment, "I did not do it intentionally, and not doing it intentionally, I said, 'Excuse me.' It appears to me that this is quite enough. I repeat to you, however, and this time on my word of honor, I think perhaps too often, that I am in haste, great haste. Leave your hold, then, I beg of you, and let me go where my business calls me."
"Monsieur,"
said Athos, letting him go,
"you are not polite. It is easy to perceive that you come from a distance."
D'Artagnan had already strode down 3 or 4 stairs, but at Athos's last remark he stopped short. "Morbleu, monsieur," said he, "however far I come, it is not you who can give me a lesson in good manners. I warn you."
"Perhaps,"
said Athos. "If I were not in such haste, and if I were not running after someone," said D'Artagnan.
"Monsieur, man in a hurry, you can find me without running. Me, you understand."
"And where, I pray you?"
"Near the Carmes Deschaux."
"At what hour?"
"About noon."
"About noon? That will do. I will be there."
"Endeavor not to make me wait, for at 12:15 I will cut off your ears as you run."
"Good!" cried D'Artagnan. "I will be there 10 minutes before 12." And he set off running as if the devil possessed him, hoping that he might yet find the stranger whose slow pace could not have carried him far. But at the street gate, Porthos was talking with the soldier on guard. Between the 2 talkers there was just enough room for a man to pass. D'Artagnan thought it would suffice for him, and he sprang forward like a dart between them. But D'Artagnan had reckoned without the wind. As he was about to pass, the wind blew out Porthos's long cloak, and D'Artagnan rushed straight into the middle of it. Without doubt, Porthos had reasons for not abandoning this part of his vestments, for instead of quitting his hold on the flap in his hand, he pulled it toward him, so that D'Artagnan rolled himself up in the velvet by a movement of rotation explained by the persistency of Porthos. D'Artagnan, hearing the Musketeer swear, wished to escape from the cloak, which blinded him, and sought to find his way from under the folds of it. He was particularly anxious to avoid marring the freshness of the magnificent baldric we are acquainted with, but on timidly opening his eyes, he found himself with his nose fixed between the 2 shoulders of Porthos, that is to say, exactly upon the baldric. Alas, like most things in this world which have nothing in their favor but appearances, the baldric was glittering with gold in the front, but was nothing but simple buff behind. Vainglorious as he was, Porthos could not afford to have a baldric wholly of gold, but had at least half. One could comprehend the necessity of the cold and the urgency of the cloak.
"Bless me!"
cried Porthos, making strong efforts to disembarrass himself of D'Artagnan, who was wriggling about his back.
"You must be mad to run against people in this manner."
"Excuse me," said D'Artagnan, reappearing under the shoulder of the giant, "but I am in such haste. I was running after someone, and—"
"And do you always forget your eyes when you run?"
asked Porthos. "No," replied D'Artagnan, piqued, "and thanks to my eyes I can see what other people cannot see." Whether Porthos understood him or did not understand him, giving way to his anger,
"Monsieur," said
he,
"you stand a chance of getting chastised if you rub Musketeers in this fashion."
"Chastised, monsieur?" said D'Artagnan. "The expression is strong."
"It is one that becomes a man accustomed to look his enemies in the face."
"Ah, pardieu! I know full well that you don't turn your back to yours." And the young man, delighted with his joke, went away laughing loudly. Porthos foamed with rage, and made a movement to rush after D'Artagnan. "Presently, presently," cried the latter, "when you haven't your cloak on."
"At 1 o'clock, then, behind the Luxembourg."
"Very well, at 1 o'clock, then," replied D'Artagnan, turning the angle of the street. But neither in the street he had passed through, nor in the one which his eager glance pervaded, could he see anyone, however slowly the stranger had walked. He was gone on his way, or perhaps had entered some house. D'Artagnan inquired of everyone he met with, went down to the ferry, came up again by the Rue de Seine and the Red Cross, but nothing, absolutely nothing. This chase was, however, advantageous to him in one sense, for in proportion as the perspiration broke from his forehead, his heart began to cool. He began to reflect upon the events that had passed. They were numerous and inauspicious. It was scarcely 11 o'clock in the morning, and yet this morning had already brought him into disgrace with M. de Tréville, who could not fail to think the manner in which D'Artagnan had left him a little cavalier. Besides this, he had drawn upon himself 2 good duels with 2 men, each capable of killing 3 D'Artagnans, with 2 Musketeers, in short, with 2 of those beings whom he esteemed so greatly that he placed them in his mind and heart above all other men. The outlook was sad. Sure of being killed by Athos, it may easily be understood that the young man was not very uneasy about Porthos. As hope, however, is the last thing extinguished in the heart of man, he finished by hoping that he might survive, even though with terrible wounds, in both these duels. And in case of surviving, he made the following reprehensions upon his own conduct. "What a madcap I was, and what a stupid fellow I am! That brave and unfortunate Athos was wounded on that very shoulder against which I must run head foremost like a ram. The only thing that astonishes me is that he did not strike me dead at once. He had good cause to do so. The pain I gave him must have been atrocious. As to Porthos, faith, that's a droll affair." And in spite of himself, the young man began to laugh aloud, looking round carefully, however, to see that his solitary laugh, without a cause in the eyes of passersby, offended by no one. "As to Porthos, that is certainly droll, but I am not the less a giddy fool. Are people to be run against without warning? No. And I have any right to go and peep under their cloaks to see what is not there? He would have pardoned me. He would certainly have pardoned me if I had not said anything to him about that cursed baldric. In ambiguous words, it is true, but rather drolly ambiguous. Cursed Gascon that I am, I get from one hobble into another. Friend D'Artagnan," continued he, speaking to himself with all the amenity that he thought due himself, "if you escape, of which there is not much chance, I would advise you to practice perfect politeness for the future. You must henceforth be admired and quoted as a model of it. To be obliging and polite does not necessarily make a man a coward. Look at Aramis, now. Aramis is mildness and grace personified.
Well, did anybody ever dream of calling Aramis a coward? No, certainly not. And from this moment I will endeavor to model myself after him. Ha! That's strange. Here he is."
D'Artagnan, walking and soliloquizing, had arrived within a few steps of the Hôtel d'Aiguillon, and in front of that hotel perceived Aramis, chatting gaily with three gentlemen. But as he had not forgotten that it was in presence of this young man that M. de Tréville had been so angry in the morning, and as a witness of the rebuke the Musketeers had received was not likely to be at all agreeable, he pretended not to see him. D'Artagnan, on the contrary, quite full of his plans of conciliation and courtesy, approached the young men with a profound bow, accompanied by a most gracious smile. All four, besides, immediately broke off their conversation. D'Artagnan was not so dull as not to perceive that he was one too many, but he was not sufficiently broken into the fashions of the gay world to know how to extricate himself gallantly from a false position, like that of a man who begins to mingle with people he is scarcely acquainted with, and in a conversation that does not concern him. He was seeking in his mind, then, for the least awkward means of retreat, when he remarked that Aramis had let his handkerchief fall, and by mistake, no doubt, had placed his foot upon it. This appeared to be a favorable opportunity to repair his intrusion. He stooped, and with the most gracious air he could assume, drew the handkerchief from under the foot of the Musketeer in spite of the efforts the latter made to detain it, and holding it out to him, said, "I believe, monsieur, that this is a handkerchief you would be sorry to lose." The handkerchief was indeed richly embroidered, and had a coronet and arms at one of its corners. Aramis blushed excessively, and snatched rather than took the handkerchief from the hand of the Gascon.
"Ha, ha, ha!" cried one of the guards. "Will you persist in saying, most discreet Aramis, that you are not on good terms with Madame de Bois Tracy, when that gracious lady has the kindness to lend you one of her handkerchiefs?"
Aramis darted at D'Artagnan one of those looks which inform a man that he has acquired a mortal enemy. Then, resuming his mild air, "You are deceived, gentlemen," said he. "This handkerchief is not mine, and I cannot fancy why Monsieur has taken it into his head to offer it to me rather than to one of you. And as a proof of what I say, here is mine in my pocket." So saying, he pulled out his own handkerchief, likewise a very elegant handkerchief, in a fine cambric, though cambric was dear at that period, but a handkerchief without embroidery and without arms, only ornamented with a single cipher, that of its proprietor. This time D'Artagnan was not hasty. He perceived his mistake, but the friends of Aramis were not at all convinced by his denial, and one of them addressed the young Musketeer with affected seriousness.
"If it were as you pretend it is," said he, "I should be forced, my dear Aramis, to reclaim it myself, for, as you very well know, Bois Tracy is an intimate friend of mine, and I cannot allow the property of his wife to be sported as a trophy." "You make the demand badly," replied Aramis, "and while acknowledging the justice of your reclamation, I refuse it on account of the form." "The fact is," hazarded D'Artagnan timidly, "I did not see the handkerchief fall from the pocket of Monsieur Aramis. He had his foot upon it, that is all, and I thought from having his foot upon it the handkerchief was his."
"And you were deceived, my dear sir," replied Aramis coldly, very little sensible to the reparation. Then turning toward that one of the guards who had declared himself the friend of Bois Tracy, "Besides," continued he, "I have reflected, my dear intimate of Bois Tracy, that I am not less tenderly his friend than you can possibly be, so that decidedly this handkerchief is as likely to have fallen from your pocket as mine."
"No, upon my honor!"
cried His Majesty's guardsman. "You are about to swear upon your honor, and I upon my word, and then it will be pretty evident that one of us will have lied. Now, here, Montaran, we will do better than that. Let each take a half."
"Of the handkerchief?"
"Yes."
"Perfectly just,"
cried the other two guardsmen.
The judgment of King Solomon! Aramis, you certainly are full of wisdom."
The young men burst into a laugh, and as may be supposed, the affair had no other sequel. In a moment or two the conversation ceased, and the three guardsmen and the Musketeer, after having cordially shaken hands, separated, the guardsman going one way and Aramis another. "Now is my time to make peace with this gallant man," said D'Artagnan to himself, having stood on one side during the whole of the latter part of the conversation, and with his good feeling drawing near to Aramis, who was departing without paying any attention to him. "Monsieur," said he, "you will excuse me, I hope."
"Ah, monsieur," interrupted Aramis, "permit me to observe to you that you have not acted in this affair as a gallant man ought."
"What, monsieur?" cried D'Artagnan. "And do you suppose—"
"I suppose, monsieur, that you are not a fool, and that you knew very well, although coming from Gascony, that people do not tread upon handkerchiefs without a reason. What the devil! Paris is not paved with cambric."
"Monsieur, you act wrongly in endeavoring to mortify me," said D'Artagnan, in whom the natural quarrelsome spirit began to speak more loudly than his pacific resolutions. "I am from Gascony, it's true, and since you know it, there is no occasion to tell you that Gascons are not very patient, and so that when they have begged to be excused once, were it even for a folly, they are convinced that they have done already at least as much again as they ought to have done."
"Monsieur, what I say to you about the matter," said Aramis, "is not for the sake of seeking a quarrel. Thank God, I am not a bravo. And being a Musketeer, but only for a time, I only fight when I am forced to do so, and always with great repugnance. But this time the affair is serious, for here a lady compromised by you."
"By us, you mean?" cried D'Artagnan.
"Why did you so maladroitly restore me the handkerchief?"
"Why did you so awkwardly let it fall?"
"I have said, monsieur, and I repeat, that the handkerchief did not fall from my pocket."
"And thereby you have lied twice, monsieur, for I saw it fall."
"Ah, you take it with that tone, do you, Master Gascon? Well, I will teach you how to behave yourself."
"And I will send you back to your mass book, Master Abbé. Draw, if you please, and instantly."
"Not so. If you please, my good friend, not here at least. Do you not perceive that we are opposite the Hôtel d'Auguron, which is full of the cardinal's creatures? How do I know that this is not his Eminence, who has honored you with the commission to procure my head? Now, I entertain a ridiculous partiality for my head. It seems to suit my shoulders so correctly. I wish to kill you. Be at rest as to that. But to kill you quietly, in a snug, remote place, where you will not be able to boast of your death to anybody."
"I agree, monsieur, but do not be too confident. Take your handkerchief, whether it belongs to you or another. You may perhaps stand in need of it."
"Monsieur is a Gascon?"
asked Aramis. "Yes. Monsieur does not postpone an interview through prudence."
"Prudence, monsieur, is a virtue sufficiently useless to Musketeers, I know, but indispensable to churchmen, and as I am only a Musketeer provisionally, I hold it good to be prudent. At 2 o'clock I shall have the honor of expecting you at the hotel of Monsieur de Tréville. There I will indicate to you the best place and time."
The two young men bowed and separated. Aramis ascended the street which led to the Luxembourg, while D'Artagnan, perceiving the appointed hour was approaching, took the road to the Carme Deschaux, saying to himself, "Decidedly, I can't draw back. But at least if I am killed, I shall be killed by a Musketeer." End of Chapter 4. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 5 of the D'Artagnan Romances, Volume 1, The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas, translated by William Robson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The King's Musketeers and the Cardinal's Guards. D'Artagnan was acquainted with nobody in Paris. He went therefore to his appointment with Athos without a second, determined to be satisfied with those his adversary should choose. Besides, his intention was formed to make the brave Musketeer all suitable apologies, but without meanness or weakness, fearing that might result from this duel which generally results from an affair of this kind, when a young and vigorous man fights with an adversary who is wounded and weakened. If conquered, he doubles the triumph of his antagonist. If a conqueror, he is accused of foul play and want of courage. Now, we must have badly painted the character of our adventure-seeker, or our readers must have already perceived that D'Artagnan was not an ordinary man. Therefore, while repeating to himself that his death was inevitable, he did not make up his mind to die quietly, as one less courageous and less restrained might have done in his place. He reflected upon the different characters of those with whom he was going to fight, and began to view his situation more clearly. He hoped by means of loyal excuses to make a friend of Athos, whose lordly air and austere bearing pleased him much. He flattered himself he should be able to frighten Porthos with the adventure of the baldric, which he might, if not killed upon the spot, relate to everybody, a recital which, well managed, would cover Porthos with ridicule. As to the astute Aramis, he did not entertain much dread of him, and supposing he should be able to get so far, he determined to dispatch him in a good style, or at least by hitting him in the face, as Caesar recommended his soldiers do to those of Pompey, to damage forever the beauty of which he was so proud. In addition to this, D'Artagnan possessed that invincible stock of resolution which the counsels of his father had implanted in his heart.
Endure nothing from anyone but the king, the cardinal, and Monsieur de Tréville.
He flew rather than walked toward the convent of the Carme Déchaussée, or rather Deschaux, as it was called at that period, a sort of building without a window, surrounded by barren fields, an accessory to the Preux Clercs, and which was generally employed as the place for the duels of men who had no time to lose. When D'Artagnan arrived in sight of the bare spot of ground which extended along the foot of the monastery, Athos had been waiting for 5 minutes, and 12 o'clock was striking. He was then as punctual as the Samaritan woman, and the most rigorous casuist with regard to duels could have nothing to say. Athos, who still suffered grievously from his wound, though it had been dressed anew by Monsieur de Tréville's surgeon, was seated on a post and waiting for his adversary with hat in hand, his feather even touching the ground.
Monsieur, said Athos, I have engaged 2 of my friends as seconds, but these 2 friends are not yet come, at which I am astonished, as it is not at all their custom.
I have no seconds on my part, monsieur, said D'Artagnan. For having only arrived yesterday in Paris, I as yet know no one but Monsieur de Tréville, to whom I was recommended by my father, who has the honor to be in some degree one of his friends. Athos reflected for an instant.
You know no one but Monsieur de Tréville?
He asked.
Yes, monsieur, I only know him. Well, but then, continued Athos, speaking half to himself, if I kill you, I shall have the air of a boy-slayer.
Not too much so, replied D'Artagnan with a bow that was not deficient in dignity, since you do me the honor to draw a sword with me while suffering from a wound which is very inconvenient.
Very inconvenient, upon my word. And you hurt me devilishly, I can tell you. But I will take the left hand. It is my custom in such circumstances. Do not fancy that I do you a favor. I use either hand easily, and it will be a disadvantage to you. A left-handed man is very troublesome to people who are not prepared for it. I regret I did not inform you sooner of this circumstance.
You have truly, monsieur, said D'Artagnan, bowing again, a courtesy for which I assure you I am very grateful.
You confuse me, replied Athos with his gentlemanly air. Let us talk of something else, if you please. Ah, s'blood, how you have hurt me! My shoulder quite burns.
If you would permit me, said D'Artagnan with timidity.
What, monsieur?
I have a miraculous balsam for wounds, a balsam given to me by my mother, and of which I have made a trial upon myself."
Well?
"Well, I am sure that in less than 3 days this balsam would cure you, and at the end of 3 days, when you would be cured, well, sir, it would still do me a great honor to be your man." D'Artagnan spoke these words with a simplicity that did honor to his courtesy, without throwing the least doubt upon his courage.
"Pardieu, monsieur,"
said Athos,
"that's a proposition that pleases me. Not that I can accept it, but a league of it savors of the gentleman. Thus spoke and acted the gallant knights of the time of Charlemagne, in whom every cavalier ought to seek his model. Unfortunately, we do not live in the times of the great emperor, we live in the times of the cardinal. And 3 days hence, however, well, the secret might be guarded, it would be known. I say that we were to fight, and our combat would be prevented. I think these fellows will never come."
"If you are in haste, monsieur," said D'Artagnan, with the same simplicity with which a moment before he had proposed to him to put off the duel for 3 days, "and if it be your will to dispatch me at once, do not inconvenience yourself, I pray you."
"There is another word which pleases me,"
cried Athos, with a gracious nod to D'Artagnan.
"That did not come from a man without a heart. Monsieur, I love men of your kidney, and I foresee plainly that if we don't kill each other, I should hereafter have much pleasure in your conversation. We will wait for these gentlemen, so please you. I have plenty of time, and it will be more correct. Ah, here is one of them, I believe."
In fact, at the end of the Rue Vaugirard, the gigantic Porthos appeared. "What?" cried D'Artagnan. "Is your first witness Monsieur Porthos?"
"Yes, that disturbs you."
"By no means."
"And here is the second."
D'Artagnan turned in the direction pointed to by Athos and perceived Aramis. "What?" cried he in an accent of greater astonishment than before. "Your second witness is Monsieur Aramis?"
"Doubtless. Are you not aware that we are never seen one without the others, and that we are called among the Musketeers and the Guards, at court and in the city, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, or the Three Inseparables? And yet, as you come from Dax or Pau, from Tarbes," said D'Artagnan, "it is probable you are ignorant of this little fact," said Athos.
"My faith," replied D'Artagnan, "you are well-named gentlemen, and my adventure, if it should make any noise, will prove at least that your union is not founded upon contrasts." In the meantime, Porthos had come up, waved his hand to Athos, and then turning toward D'Artagnan, stood quite astonished. Let us say in passing that he changed his baldric and relinquished his cloak.
"Ha ha ha!"
said he.
"What does this mean?"
"This is the gentleman I am going to fight with," said Athos, pointing to D'Artagnan with his hand and saluting him with the same gesture.
"Why, it is with him I am also going to fight,"
said Porthos. "But not before 1 o'clock," replied D'Artagnan.
"But I also am to fight with this gentleman,"
said Aramis, coming in his turn into the place. "But not until 2 o'clock," said D'Artagnan with the same calmness.
"But what are you going to fight about, Athos?"
asked Aramis.
"Faith, I don't very well know. He hurt my shoulder, and you, Porthos?" "Faith, I am going to fight because I am going to fight,"
answered Porthos, reddening. Athos, whose keen eye lost nothing, perceived a faintly sly smile pass over the lips of the young Gascon as he replied, "We had a short discussion upon dress."
"And you, Aramis?"
asked Athos.
"Oh, ours is a theological quarrel,"
replied Aramis, making a sign to D'Artagnan to keep secret the cause of their duel. Athos indeed saw a second smile on the lips of D'Artagnan.
"Indeed?"
said Athos. "Yes, a passage of St. Augustine upon which we could not agree," said the Gascon.
"Decidedly, this is a clever fellow," murmured Athos.
"And now you are assembled, gentlemen," said D'Artagnan, "permit me to offer you my apologies." At this word apologies, a cloud passed over the brow of Athos, a haughty smile curled the lip of Porthos, and a negative sign was the reply of Aramis. "You do not understand me, gentlemen," said D'Artagnan, throwing up his head, the sharp and bold lines of which were at the moment gilded by a bright ray of the sun. "I asked to be excused in case I should not be able to discharge my debt to all three, for Monsieur Athos has the right to kill me first, which must much diminish the face value of your bill, Monsieur Porthos, and render yours almost null, Monsieur Aramis. And now, gentlemen, I repeat, excuse me, but on that account only, and on guard!" At these words, with the most gallant air possible, D'Artagnan drew his sword. The blood had mounted to the head of D'Artagnan, and at that moment he would have drawn his sword against all the Musketeers in the kingdom as willingly as he now did against Athos, Porthos, and Aramis. It was a quarter past midday. The sun was in its zenith, and the spot chosen for the scene of the duel was exposed to its full ardor.
"It is very hot," said Athos, drawing his sword in its turn, "and yet I cannot take off my doublet, for I just now felt my wound begin to bleed again, and I should not like to annoy Monsieur with the sight of blood, which he has not drawn from me himself."
"That is true, monsieur," replied D'Artagnan, "and whether drawn by myself or another, I assure you I shall always view with regret the blood of so brave a gentleman. I will therefore fight in my doublet like yourself."
"Come, come, enough of such compliments,"
cried Porthos.
"Remember, we are waiting for our turns."
"Speak for yourself when you are inclined to utter such incongruities," interrupted Aramis. "For my part, I think what they say is very well said, and quite worthy of two gentlemen."
"When you please, monsieur,"
said Athos, putting himself on guard. "I waited your orders," said D'Artagnan, crossing swords. But scarcely had the two rapiers clashed, when a company of the guards of his Eminence, commanded by Monsieur de Jussac, turned the corner of the convent. "The Cardinal's guards!" cried Aramis and Porthos at the same time.
"Sheath your swords, gentlemen! Sheath your swords!"
But it was too late. The two combatants had been seen in a position which left no doubt of their intentions.
"Hello!"
cried Jussac, advancing toward them and making a sign to his men to do so likewise.
"Hello, Musketeers! Fighting here, are you? And the edicts? What has become of them?"
"You are very generous, gentlemen of the guards," said Athos, full of rancor, for Jussac was one of the aggressors of the preceding day.
"If we were to see you fighting, I can assure you that we would make no effort to prevent you. Leave us alone, then, and you will enjoy little amusement without cost to yourselves."
"Gentlemen," said Jussac,
"it is with great regret that I pronounce the thing impossible. Duty before everything. Sheathe, then, if you please, and follow us."
"Monsieur," said Aramis, parodying Jussac, "it would afford us great pleasure to obey your polite invitation if it depended upon ourselves, but unfortunately the thing is impossible. Monsieur de Tréville has forbidden it. Pass on your way, then. It is the best thing to do." This raillery exasperated Jussac.
"We will charge upon you, then," said he, "if you disobey."
"There are 5 of them," said Athos half aloud, "and we are but 3. We shall be beaten again and must die on the spot. For on my part, I declare I will never appear again before the captain as a conquered man." Athos, Porthos, and Aramis instantly drew near one another, while Jussac drew up his soldiers. This short interval was sufficient to determine D'Artagnan on the part he was to take. It was one of those events which decide the life of a man. It was a choice between the king and the cardinal. The choice made, it must be persisted in. To fight, that was to disobey the law. That was to risk his head. That was to make at one blow an enemy of a minister more powerful than the king himself. All this the young man perceived, and yet, to his praise we speak it, he did not hesitate a second. Turning toward Athos and his friends, "Gentlemen," said he, "allow me to correct your words, if you please. You said you were but three, but it appears to me we are four."
"But you are not one of us,"
said Porthos. "That's true," replied D'Artagnan. "I have not the uniform, but I have the spirit. My heart is that of a Musketeer. I feel it, monsieur, and that impels me on."
"Withdraw, young man!"
cried Jussac, who doubtless, by his gestures and the expression of his countenance, had guessed D'Artagnan's design.
"You may retire. We consent to that. Save your skin. Begone quickly."
D'Artagnan did not budge.
"Decidedly, you are a brave fellow,"
said Athos, pressing the young man's hand.
"Come, come, choose your part,"
replied Jussac.
"Well," said Porthos to Aramis, "we must do something." "Monsieur is full of generosity,"
said Athos. But all three reflected upon the youth of D'Artagnan and dreaded his inexperience. "We should only be three, one of whom is wounded, with the addition of a boy," resumed Athos. "And yet it will not be the less said we were four men."
"Yes, but to yield,"
said Porthos. "That is difficult," replied Athos. D'Artagnan comprehended their irresolution. "Try me, gentlemen," said he, "and I swear to you by my honor that I will not go hence if we are conquered." "What is your name, my brave fellow?" said Athos. "D'Artagnan, monsieur."
"Well, then, Athos, Porthos, Aramis, and D'Artagnan. Forward!" cried Athos. "Come, gentlemen, have you decided?"
cried Jussac for the third time.
"It is done, gentlemen," said Athos. "And what is your choice?" asked Jussac. "We are about to have the honor of charging you," replied Aramis, lifting his hat with one hand and drawing his sword with the other. "Ha! You resist, do you? Splud, does that astonish you?"
And the 9 combatants rushed upon each other with a fury which, however, did not exclude a certain degree of method. Athos fixed upon a certain Cahusac, a favorite of the Cardinal's. Porthos had Bicarat, and Aramis found himself opposed to 2 adversaries. As to D'Artagnan, he sprang toward Jussac himself. The heart of the young Gascon beat as if it would burst through his side. Not from fear, God be thanked, he had not the shade of it, but with emulation. He fought like a furious tiger, turning 10 times round his adversary and changing his ground and his guard 20 times. Jussac was, as was then said, a fine blade and had had much practice. Nevertheless, it required all his skill to defend himself against an adversary who, active and energetic, departed every instant from received rules, attacking him on all sides at once, and yet parrying like a man who had the greatest respect for his own epidermis. This contest at length exhausted Jussac's patience. Furious at being held in check by one whom he had considered a boy, he became warm and began to make mistakes. D'Artagnan, who, though wanting in practice, had a sound theory, redoubled his agility. Jussac, anxious to put an end to this, springing forward, aimed a terrible thrust at his adversary, but the latter parried it, and while Jussac was recovering himself, glided like a serpent beneath his blade and passed his sword through his body. Jussac fell like a dead mass. D'Artagnan then cast an anxious and rapid glance over the battlefield. Aramis had killed one of his adversaries, but the other pressed him warmly. Nevertheless, Aramis was in a good situation and able to defend himself. Bicarat and Porthos had just made counter-hits. Porthos had received a thrust through his arm, and Bicarat one through his thigh. But neither of these 2 wounds was serious, and they only fought more earnestly. Athos, wounded anew by a Cahusac, became evidently paler, but did not give way a foot. He only changed his sword hand and fought with his left hand. According to the laws of dueling at the period, D'Artagnan was at liberty to assist whom he pleased. While he was endeavoring to find out which of his companions stood in greatest need, he caught a glance from Athos. The glance was of sublime eloquence. Athos would have died rather than appeal for help, but he could look, and with that look ask assistance. D'Artagnan interpreted it. With a terrible bound he sprang to the side of Cahusac, crying, "To me, Monsieur Guardsman! I will slay you!" Cahusac turned around. It was time for Athos, whose great courage alone supported him, sank upon his knee. "S'blood!" cried he to D'Artagnan. "Do not kill him, young man, I beg of you. I have an old affair to settle with him when I am cured and sound again. Disarm him only. Make sure of his sword. That's it. Very well done." The exclamation was drawn from Athos by seeing the sword of Cahusac fly 20 paces from him. D'Artagnan and Cahusac sprang forward at the same instant, the one to recover, the other to obtain the sword, but D'Artagnan, being the more active, reached it first and placed his foot upon it. Cahusac immediately ran to the guardsman whom Aramis had killed, seized his rapier, and returned toward D'Artagnan. But on his way he met Athos, who during his relief, which D'Artagnan had procured him, had recovered his breath, and who, for fear that D'Artagnan would kill his enemy, wished to resume the fight. D'Artagnan perceived that it would be disobliging Athos not to leave him alone, and in a few minutes Cahusac fell with a sword thrust through his throat. At the same instant, Aramis placed his sword point on the breast of his fallen enemy, and forced him to ask for mercy. There only then remained Porthos and Bicarat. Porthos made 1,000 flourishes, asking Bicarat what o'clock it could be, and offering him his compliments upon his brother's having just obtained a company in the regiment of Navarre. But, jest as he might, he gained nothing. Bicarat was one of those iron men who never fell dead. Nevertheless, it was necessary to finish. The watch might come up and take all the combatants, wounded or not, royalists or cardinalists. Athos and Aramis and D'Artagnan surrounded Bicarat and required him to surrender. Though alone against all and with a wound in his thigh, Bicarat wished to hold out. But Jussac, who had risen upon his elbow, cried out to him to yield. Bicarat was a Gascon, and D'Artagnan was. He turned a deaf ear and contented himself with laughing, and between two parries finding time to point to a spot of earth with his sword. "Here," cried he, parodying a verse of the Bible, "here will Bicarat die, for I am only left, and they seek my life." "But there are 4 against you. Leave off, I command you." "Ah, if you command me, that's another thing," said Bicarat. "As you are my commander, it is my duty to obey." And springing backward, he broke his sword across his knee to avoid the necessity of surrendering it, threw the pieces over the convent wall, and crossed him arms, whistling a cardinalist air. Bravery is always respected, even in an enemy. The Musketeers saluted Bicarat with their swords and returned them to their sheaths. D'Artagnan did the same. Then, assisted by Bicarat, the only one left standing, they bore Jussac, Cahusac, and one of Aramis's adversaries, who was only wounded, under the porch of the convent. The fourth, as we have said, was dead. They then rang the bell, and carrying away 4 swords out of 5, they took their road, intoxicated with joy, toward the hotel of Monsieur de Tréville. They walked arm in arm, occupying the whole width of the street and taking in every Musketeer they met, so that in the end it became a triumphal march. The heart of D'Artagnan swam in delirium. He marched between Athos and Porthos, pressing them tenderly. "If I am not yet a Musketeer," said he to his new friends as he passed through the gateway of Monsieur de Tréville's hotel, "at least I have entered upon my apprenticeship, haven't I?" End of chapter 5. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia.
And so a legend is born. 4 men, once adversaries, are now brothers in arms, united by a shared victory and a common enemy. The cry of "all for one and one for all" has been uttered for the first time. D'Artagnan has not only survived his first day, he has earned the respect and friendship of the very men he was supposed to fight. But this victory has also put him directly in the crosshairs of the powerful Cardinal Richelieu. What will happen when the king himself hears of this famous brawl? Join us in our next video for the royal consequences.